Question number 2, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, how much did the government's share sales in Mighty River Power, Meridian and Air New Zealand raise, given that the supplement to the 2010 investment statement of the Government of New Zealand projected that those sales would raise $5.18 billion?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the potential proceeds the member quotes were based on estimated commercial values of the companies at that time. They were one of a number of estimates by the Board and Treasury, but they were not market valuations because, of course, there was no market on which to value the companies. There was only a market valuation for Air New Zealand because it was already listed on the share market. The share program has confirmed what the actual market values of these companies are. They take into account all sorts of factors, including a proposal to nationalise the electricity sector using a model found in only one other country. So in answer to the member's question, the partial share sales have so far raised almost $4 billion for taxpayers.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the sales have so far raised almost $4 billion, whereas they were valued at $5.2 billion, is he satisfied with his performance as Finance Minister, given that he has lost $1.2 billion of public wealth with his failed asset sales program?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, I find it very hard to take from that member his criticism of the government's proceeds from the asset sales when he was doing his absolute level best through most of the year to scare investors away from the power companies, of which there have been 2 that have been floated. You can't sit there in the Greens and say you're working to sabotage the float and then turn around and say the value isn't high enough.
Point of order, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked whether he was satisfied with his performance.
Order.
Are you satisfied?
Order. The member not only asked that, he then effectively said that the minister was responsible for the loss of the $1.2 billion. If the member wants a simple question asked, I'd advise him to ask that clear and simple question. I can assist him. But in this case, the minister has addressed the question. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Well, does the minister think he's in any position to lecture the Greens in this House on prudent economic management when not only...
Order. Allow the member to finish his question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he think he's in any position to lecture this House on prudent economic management when not only did he lose $1.2 billion of taxpayer money on the asset sale so far, but the asset sales process has cost more than $250 million, money that went to brokers, lawyers and admin when it should have gone to schools, hospitals and good housing for New Zealand families?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I disagree completely with the 2 suppositions tacked on to the member's question. I agree, yes, definitely the member's question, and the Green Party proves the quality of the government's economic management every day.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
What does he say to the New Zealanders who believed his spin and believed the $8 million taxpayer-funded ad campaign and bought into these companies, given that the value of the shares bought by retail investors has fallen by $150 million so far?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the member needs to decide which line he's running here. Either they've been sold to National's greedy mates and deserve everything that's coming to them, or they've been sold to mum and dad investors who are losing out. The whole concept is ludicrous. He actually has been complaining that investors would sell them on for a quick buck. The reality is most investors are still holding the shares and they haven't lost any value because they haven't sold them.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is his answer to the question raised today in the Don Post by Vernon Small regarding the failed asset sale program, who said, why did the government ever waste so much effort on something so unpopular that would make so little difference to the economy?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'm happy to give a very clear answer to that question. The government bothered for three reasons. One, to get those companies on the share market so they could be properly analysed and properly supervised by a market economy. Number two, that gives the opportunity for the market to grow more opportunities for investors in shares in the New Zealand economy, and the New Zealand share market has been boosted through this process. And number three, to so far save the government from borrowing $4 billion that otherwise it would have had to borrow on the world stage. But if the member thinks it's so wrong, I invite him to go out and declare transparently, as this government did, declare transparently that they'd borrow $4 billion and buy the shares back.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is Brian Gaynor correct in the New Zealand Herald when arguing about the failed asset sale program and the government's economic management? He said, investors are now realising that there are huge risks associated with the current administration because it doesn't appear to have anyone at the helm steering a straight and consistent course as far as major business decisions are concerned.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And if Mr Gaynor wanted to see a contrast between a government that knows how to run an economy and one that doesn't, then he should vote Greens at the next election and see what he could really wish for.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are the market rumours true that are circulating at the moment that the government is going to back away from the Genesis sale, given the complete failure of the asset sales program so far, or is National determined to sell the assets regardless?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, nobody takes the Greens seriously with their views on the shares sales because they have a doctrinaire opposition to them. The reality is the share sales have been a success. They have saved New Zealand taxpayers $3.9 billion that otherwise would have had to been borrowed on world markets. And the opposition, if they really have a conviction on this, should get out there today and promise to buy the shares back.
Order.
Point of order, Dr. Russell Norman.
Mr. Speaker, it was a pretty direct question about the Genesis sale.
Order. I invite the member to ask his question again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are the market rumours true that the government is going to back away from the Genesis sale, given the failure of the asset sales program so far, or is National determined to proceed regardless?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I was disagreeing with the proposition contained in that speech from the member. And the reality is the government does intend to proceed with the Genesis sale, does intend to raise more money so we don't have to borrow more money on the world markets, and the public will judge the quality of New Zealand's management of debt, and one of the things they'll judge is the amount of income raised from these mixed ownership model companies.
Question number 3, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.